Have you ever woken up in a house perched precariously on a sheer cliff, isolated in the middle of a roaring ocean, or floating right amidst the misty clouds? From rusted steel fortresses standing lonely amidst the deep sea, and monasteries clinging tightly to steep mountainsides, to metal shelters defying freezing ice at breathtaking altitudes. There are even lighthouses, swallowed by violent waves year-round, or isolated structures drifting as far as outer space. All of them are architectural wonders so spectacular that they seem unreal, where the boundary between survival and extreme danger is just a single step away. Join me on a journey to discover the craziest structures on Earth, where survival, ambition, and isolation coexist in a form that was previously only possible in our imagination. Bivacco Buffa di Perrero, Italy. It is hard to believe that on an almost 90-degree cliff, people once built a house with a wooden roof and glass windows as if it belonged on flat ground. At about 9,055 feet above sea level, this shelter reveals only a small front wall, while everything around it is locked in by sheer vertical rock faces. Built between 1915 and 1918 from wood, brick, and stone, the structure once served a harsh, high mountain front during World War I. Inside are only 12 simple wooden bunk beds, with no electricity, no running water, and no toilet, while reaching this place requires climbers to cross iron ladders bolted to the cliff, narrow exposed ledges, and the fear of the abyss below. With no traditional foundation, the house sits neatly inside a natural rock alcove, as if the mountain itself has been holding it in place for more than 100 years. After decades of abandonment and roof collapse caused by avalanches and alpine storms, the site was fully restored by Italy's 6th Alpini Regiment in 2022 and now serves as an emergency shelter for climbers. Elliðaey Island, Iceland. Would you dare live alone in the only white house on an island only about 110 acres wide, thrown into the sea wind like a survival challenge? That isolation began 5,000 to 6,000 years ago when a volcanic eruption pushed this landmass up from the ocean floor and left it alone in the North Atlantic. On the island's curved surface, shaped Like half of a giant upside-down bowl, the house does not belong to a billionaire or aliens, but was built by a puffin hunting association in 1953 as a temporary shelter. But to stay here, people must accept no grid electricity, no internet, no underground water system, and only rainwater collected from the roof for daily use. Outside the house are black basalt cliffs, dropping almost 90 degrees into the violent sea, making this place feel more like a natural fortress than a resting spot. So, no matter how much money you have, you cannot rent this house, because its door only opens to people allowed by the local association. Capanna Margherita, Italy. Inside are warmth, food, and scientific research. But outside this metal house are permanent ice, low pressure, and lightning strikes that can kill. At about 14,941 feet high, air pressure is only around 50% of sea level, making every breath weaker and pushing the body toward oxygen shortage. Because it often faces lightning on an exposed summit, the copper alloy outer shell turns the building into a Faraday cage, guiding electricity around the outside instead of letting it pass through the interior. Since 1893, when Queen Margherita crossed snow and ice herself to open this place, the building has meant more than an ordinary mountain refuge. By 1980, the modern version had to be assembled with 74 helicopter flights, with part of the structure extending over a deep cliff, as if floating between clouds and ice. Capanna Margherita is not only a stop for climbers, but also a medical research station where doctors study how the human body reacts to extreme altitude and oxygen shortage. Laojun Lighthouse, France. Just one step outside at the wrong moment was enough to turn Laojun into the most famous life or death lighthouse photograph in history. This tower does not stand on a safe island, but is anchored directly onto a lonely underwater rock in the violent waters off France. When powerful storms arrive, the entire structure can disappear behind towering walls of white water, leaving only a faint light struggling through the darkness. In 1989, the lighthouse keeper stepped outside after hearing a helicopter and believing it was a rescue team, while a giant wave was crashing down right behind him. He was lucky enough to step back inside at the last moment, but former keepers describe storms here as making floors shake, furniture crash to the ground, and waves explode against the tower like being trapped inside a giant metal barrel. La Jument was built after a shipwreck disaster that killed more than 250 people, so its light serves not only as a guide for ships, but also as a lasting memory of tragedy preserved in the dark sea. Refuge des Cosmiques, France. On the edge of frozen rock, this place looks like a small metal house hanging between thin sky and a bottomless snow abyss. At about 11,854 feet high, the air loses around 35% of its oxygen, forcing the body to breathe harder and the heart to work faster, even while standing still. Summer nights can still drop to between -4 and -22 degrees Fahrenheit, while storms above 93 miles per hour can turn one wrong step into a disappearance in the ice. The building does not sit on flat ground, but is held by steel anchors driven deep into the rock, with a metal shell designed to resist brutal wind. Around it are giant ice towers and glacier cracks dozens of feet deep, where smooth white snow can hide a deadly trap. The strangest part is that inside this extreme world, it still works like a high mountain shelter house, with hot meals, sleeping rooms, and atmospheric research equipment. Bivouac Gervasutti, Italy. This red capsule looks like a piece of technology dropped into an ice age, trapped on a cliff where nature leaves no room for mistakes. At about 9,301 feet high, oxygen levels are only around 70%, making the body lose breath quickly before it can adapt to the high mountain environment. With no natural protection, The structure must face blizzard winds above 124 miles per hour and harsh UV rays from the thin atmosphere. Instead of traditional stone or brick, the structure was made from fiberglass and composite alloy, 33 feet long, but weighing only about 4,365 pounds, so a helicopter could lift it to its current position. Its tube shape is not only futuristic, but also helps split the wind and push snow downward, preventing it from being buried in white storms. Inside, the floor area is only about 323 square feet, yet it can hold 12 bunk beds, turning this small capsule into a survival home among broken rock, cold ice, and deep drops. International Space Station. This habitable artificial satellite orbits Earth about 249 miles above the surface, like a laboratory hanging in space. Its most fascinating feature is the direct view down to Earth, where astronauts can see the planet's curve, giant swirling storms, glowing auroras, and cities shining at night beneath a thin, bright layer of atmosphere. Outside the station are endless darkness, vacuum, and deadly radiation, where life inside is separated from death in space by only a thin shell of aluminum and Kevlar. Inside that shell is a narrow maze filled with cables, screens, storage bags, and scientific equipment fixed to the walls. In microgravity, astronauts do not have a fixed floor or ceiling, because every surface can be used for work, holding on, sleeping, or moving. This contrast between Earth's beauty outside the window and the cramped living space inside makes it humanity's most fragile, yet extraordinary outpost beyond the planet. Laojun Mountain, China. When a sea of clouds rises high enough to swallow the lower slopes, the summit looks like an island drifting across the sky. This mountain was formed from a giant granite mass, carrying traces of geological change that lasted about 1.9 billion years. Its highest peak rises to about 7,274 feet. Where the air is thinner, the temperature drops sharply, and thick fog covers the area for more than 200 days each year. In winter, temperatures can fall to -4 degrees Fahrenheit, freezing water vapor quickly on plants and cliffs and turning the landscape into a sharp, icy world. About 2,500 years ago, this place became linked with Taoist tradition and turned into a sacred mountain of cultivation, retreat, and alchemy legends. The most unbelievable part is not the structures on the summit, but the fact that people once carried building materials to heights above 6,500 feet to create them among clouds and cliffs. Sphinx Observatory, Switzerland. This observatory is like an eye made of stone and steel, standing on a sharp mountain ridge among permanent snow and ice to watch the sky. The structure stands at about 11,716 feet high, between two large, snow-covered mountains in Switzerland, almost separated from the valleys below. It is connected to Jungfraujoch, home to the highest railway station in Europe and one of the continent's highest permanently staffed research facilities. Opened in 1937, this place became an engineering symbol of bringing science into one of the harshest environments. Its astronomy dome can open and close to protect telescopes from winds up to about 124 miles per hour, while many laboratories are reserved for meteorology and cosmic ray research. Perhaps the most remarkable thing is not the height of the structure, but the fact that humans still maintain science in a place almost cut off from the world below. Monte Rosa Hut, Switzerland. Falling into the harsh Alps like a giant crystal, this 6.5 million Swiss franc masterpiece proudly holds on at about 9,458 feet high. Its foundation rests on a permanent ocean of ice that keeps cracking, where UV rays and a snow-reflected light can cause snow blindness or skin burns very quickly. To conquer this place with no road access at all, helicopters had to make up to 3,000 flights to lift wooden boards and glass pieces up the mountain for assembly. With a 22nd century look and a reflective aluminum glass shell, the building produces about 90% of its own energy through 1,292 square feet of solar panels. When light touches it, the whole polygonal mass glows like a bright rose gold lighthouse in the cold grey wilderness. In contrast to the sharp, cold exterior, the warm, wooden core inside was carefully planned to provide enough space for 120 climbers overnight. Maunsell Sea Forts, United Kingdom. Offshore, in the cold grey spray, the whole group of forts rises like a herd of dead iron monsters standing still on thin legs in the sea. They were built during World War II for air defense, using hollow concrete bases that were pulled out to sea and then flooded so they sank into the soft seabed at about 30 degrees. Each group had 7 separate towers, each weighing about 300 tons, once linked by hanging steel bridges, so if one tower fell, the others could keep fighting. Daily tides rising and falling by about 16 to 20 feet created powerful currents that kept cutting around the legs, while winter fog made the metal rust faster. After the military abandoned them, these ghost towers were once taken over by pirate radio stations, turning the isolated scrap field into a rebel base beyond mainland law. Today, broken windows, rotting bridges, and metal groans in the wind make this place feel like a dead village staring into the dark sea. Panagia Hozoviotissa Monastery, Greece. From a distance, this monastery looks less like a building and more like a streak of white paint thrown onto a vertical cliff and left there for nearly 1,000 years. The structure is attached directly to a near-vertical rock wall about 984 feet above the sea, making it appear as if it is floating in mid-air without support. Construction began in 1017 and was completed in 1088, allowing this remarkable place to survive for more than 9 centuries. Inside is an extremely narrow, 8-story structure, with some sections only about 16 feet wide, causing the building to blend into the cliff behind it. To reach the entrance, visitors must climb about 300 stone steps along the edge of the precipice, with a vast drop waiting below. After centuries of resisting rock, wind, and sea, this place still exists like a lonely house of faith, hanging high above the world. Masada Fortress, Israel. In the burned, dry desert, this fortress looks like a block of rock cut away from the world, where people once turned an isolated summit into a final shelter. Rising about 1,480 feet above the water below and surrounded by sheer cliffs, it was almost impossible to reach through a direct attack. To survive in that harsh place, ancient builders carved 12 giant reservoirs into the rock, storing water from rare desert floods. Even visitors who want to reach the top today must climb a narrow dirt path about 1 mile long, twisting under harsh sun and sometimes taking up to 2 hours. During the siege of 72 to 73 AD, Roman forces also could not climb straight up, so they had to build a massive ramp to drag war toward the fortress. Nearly 2,000 years later, the siege marks are still carved clearly into the desert floor, as if this place never escaped the memory of its final battle. Fastnet Rock Lighthouse, Ireland. In the white foam of the North Atlantic, This lighthouse looks like the last stone nail pinning humanity to the edge of the ocean. It stands about 8 miles from the coast, on a rock that rises only about 98 feet at low tide, leaving almost no open ground for a foundation. This sea area often faces storm winds above 99 miles per hour and waves carrying enormous force, strong enough to crush any weak structure. The first cast iron tower, built in 1854, shook violently in storms, so people had to replace it with the stone tower completed in 1904. The current structure was built from 2,074 granite blocks, weighing about 2 to 3 US tons each, with a curved base that lets waves slide upward and break apart instead of striking the tower directly. In darkness and fog, its white flash every 5 seconds cuts across the night sea like a blade of light, keeping distant ships alive. Key Monastery, India. On the barren mountainside, this monastery appears like a giant white crown trapped between rock, snow, and thin air. Standing at about 13,668 feet above sea level, the site has only around 60% of the oxygen found in lowland areas, making even normal movement feel exhausting. The surrounding region is a harsh, cold desert, where winter temperatures can fall below -22 degrees Fahrenheit, while strong ultraviolet sunlight can still burn exposed skin during the day. Over nearly 1,000 years, the monastery has survived raids, fires, and earthquakes, yet generations of monks continued rebuilding on top of the old ruins. That process created a multi-level maze of narrow corridors, tiny windows, and thick walls that served as both a monastery and a defensive fortress. In this isolated mountain world that seems forgotten by time, about 300 monks still live and study here, much as they have for centuries. Guaita Tower, San Marino. Surrounded on all sides by Italy, yet keeping an independent spirit, this stone fortress clings to the edge of a cliff like a lonely watch house hanging in the sky. The tower stands on a 20-million-year-old limestone mass at about 2,464 feet high, where the cliff drops almost straight down and turns every approach into a life-or-death challenge. First built in the 11th century, the structure does not rely on a normal foundation but locks directly into the natural rock core, allowing it to survive for nearly 1,000 years. Whenever fog rises and swallows the valley below, the mountain body disappears, leaving the grey fortress floating like a lonely island on a sea of clouds. Under sunset, the rough walls absorb the last sunlight and glow with a deep orange-red color like a burning rock above the cliff. From the highest arrow slit, the 360-degree view stretches all the way to the horizon, turning this place into a lonely stone lookout, guarding the living memory of a small nation. Pilgrimage Church of Maria Gern, Germany. Under the shadow of a giant mountain, Maria Gern Church looks as if nature has pressed it smaller until it feels unbelievably fragile. The valley around it was shaped during the last ice age, when giant glaciers scraped the land more than 10,000 years ago. Because the mountain behind rises over 8,858 feet, the large Baroque building looks tiny, like a toy placed under a huge stone wall. Strangely, this costly church was first built to protect a wooden statue of the Virgin Mary, less than 3 feet tall, carved in 1666. From 1708 to 1710, the main structure was finished in only 2 years, in harsh mountain terrain and without modern machines. When snow covers the valley or sunset turns the peaks behind it red, the red-pink dome becomes a fragile light inside the cold beauty of the Alps. Bishop Rock, England. It is hard to believe that a tiny rock almost swallowed by waves can carry one of the most resilient lighthouses in maritime history. Bishop Rock is only about 151 feet long and 52 feet wide, and Guinness recognizes it as the smallest island in the world with a man-made structure on it. The rock's surface is so narrow that the lighthouse foundation nearly covers every space, making the tower feel as if it has been pressed straight into the sea. At the lowest tide, the natural rock rises only about 13 feet above the water, but during violent storms, waves can cover the entire island. To resist that force, the current tower was built from 5,700 tons of granite, with lower blocks locking into each other as if humans were trying to pin a point of light into the raging sea. Capo Caccia Lighthouse, Italy. On the edge of a vertical cliff, this lighthouse looks like a lonely house guarding the border between solid land and a straight drop into the sea. It does not stand on ordinary rock, but clings to cast limestone formed during the Cretaceous period, about 100 to 140 million years ago. Although the tower is only 79 feet tall, its light works at a height of 610 feet because it sits on the clifftop, like looking down at the sea from a 60-story building. Its exposed position over the water forces the structure to face northwest winds that can exceed 62 miles per hour, turning the cliff edge into an extremely dangerous place. Since 1864, the white light has flashed every 5 seconds, like a small sign of life, surrounded by darkness, fog, and a restless sea. Before automation, lighthouse keepers lived in isolation here among storms, a 90-degree cliff, and more than 650 steps carved into the mountain like an exhausting path back to safety. San Juan de Gaztelugatxe, Spain. The stone path here looks like the spine of a sea dragon, crawling from the ocean to the island summit before disappearing at the door of a lonely chapel. The structure dates back to the 10th century, standing on top of a cone-shaped rocky island and connected to the mainland by only one winding stone bridge. The island rises about 262 feet high and faces violent sea storms, where wind above 62 miles per hour can tear off roof tiles and force people to crawl close to the ground. Salt mist is blown all the way to the summit and works like an invisible acid, slowly eating the stone mortar and making metal rust very quickly. More than 240 rough stone steps were not only made for climbing, but also once slowed and broke the formation of attackers wearing heavy armor. After about 1,000 years of burning, raids, and lightning strikes at sea, the chapel on top still clings to the rock like the last human mark before the violent ocean. Dunluce Castle, Ireland. Suspended between ocean winds and the empty drop below, this is the kind of place that makes people wonder why anyone chose to live here. The entire structure clings to an ancient mass of volcanic basalt, the remains of lava flows that cooled about 50 to 60 million years ago. The ground beneath it rises more than 98 feet above the sea and constantly faces salty air and winter winds exceeding 62 miles per hour from the open ocean. Built around 1500, it once served as a powerful stronghold, yet its isolated position on the cliff meant daily life was always close to danger. The most famous disaster happened when part of the cliff suddenly collapsed during a storm, dragging the great kitchen and several people into the sea, while only one boy survived. After crossing the narrow bridge into the ruins, visitors find empty windows, hanging fireplaces, and unfinished stone stairs, as if the castle is still slowly disappearing piece by piece. Needles Lighthouse. If you think a lighthouse is simply a guiding light, then Needles Lighthouse was built to face fog, submerged rocks, and some of the most dangerous waters around England. It clings to the last rocky point of a chain of white chalk stacks, where sharp stone pillars rise from the ocean like the broken remains of a giant bridge cut apart by waves. Beneath that beauty lies soft chalk, a type of limestone that erodes easily, allowing the sea to slowly wear away the cliffs year after year. Because of these dangerous submerged rocks, the lighthouse beam can reach up to 23 miles, helping guide ships away from disaster. The current lighthouse was built in 1859 to replace an older beacon on the high cliffs, where thick fog often swallowed its warning signal. Since 1994, it has been fully automated, ending the era when lighthouse keepers spent months in isolation among powerful winds, crashing waves, and the feeling of guarding the very edge of the world. Pridrangaviti Lighthouse, Iceland. Between the Black Ocean and violent wind, this lighthouse looks like a tiny white nail driven into a stone needle piercing the sea. It stands alone about 4 miles from the mainland, with no road, beach, or gentle rock shelf for people to reach it safely. With nothing to block the wind, gusts above 62 miles per hour can turn one slipping hand on the vertical cliff into a disaster with no second chance. In 1939, before helicopters were used here, builders had to stand on each other's shoulders on a rocking boat just to touch the first ledge. The most terrifying part is that this place has no real escape, because once bad weather stops a helicopter from landing, a person is almost trapped between vertical rock, rolling waves, and the grey sky. Dhankar, India. This ancient, isolated village on the Himalaya looks like a cliff fortress made of dust, earth, and a harsh beauty that feels timeless. It sits at about 12,774 feet above sea level, where the air is thin and the landscape seems polished by wind across ages. What makes it fragile is that the entire settlement is not anchored to hard rock, but rests on compacted clay and old lake sediments, so the ground itself can shift. Around it stand sharp earth pillars shaped by long weathering, rising like giant fingers from the soil. The roughly 1,000-year-old homes and monastery use no cement, built only from sun-dried mud bricks, stone, and poplar wood, blending into the cliff like massive termite mounds rather than man-made walls. From the highest point, you can see two major rivers joining into a huge Y above wide silver floodplains, yet severe erosion led the World Monuments Fund to place it on its 2006 list of the 100 most endangered sites.